public speakers? Good morning, everyone. July meeting of the Finance Committee, MTA Board. Before we get started, I'd like to welcome new board member, Mr. Larry Schwartz, sitting off to my left. First order of business, if there are no public speakers, is to approve the June 22nd meetings. May I have a motion? Second, any discussion or comments regarding the minutes? If not, may I have a motion to approve? Minutes are approved. Okay, Doug, could you take us through the work plan?
Yeah, we have no change to the work plan, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Also, no budget. We don't have a budget watch in July. On Wednesday, Mr. Foran will be presenting the July financial plan to the combined meeting of the Finance Committee and the full MTA Board. Following that, now we have Finance Watch, and Pat McCoy is here.
Good afternoon. Finance Watch appears on page 22 of your committee materials today. We begin with just an update on our ratings picture, noting that on July 10th, Moody's Investor Service upgraded the transportation revenue bond credit to A1 from its prior rating of A2. And as we note here, the upgrade reflects trends of improvement over recent years in our operating environment, including strong service area economic growth and strengthened financial condition of the supporting governments, notably New York City and New York State. Moody's also noted growing ridership, stable financial performance, strong budget management, governance, and planning, and bondholder protections of the gross pledge of a diversified revenue stream. So we're pleased with that. And I did send out that full report to the board, so you have that in your inbox. We reported on the bond anticipation note transaction last month. I won't cover that again. We note that on July 1st, we effected a mandatory tender and remarketed $193 million of TBTA general revenue variable rate refunding bonds. The prior letter of credit provider with Bank of America, that letter of credit expired, and we replaced that with a letter of credit from the Bank of Tokyo Mitsubishi. And that's now scheduled to expire on June 29th, and that remarketing went well. Next, we have in the market this week approximately $500 million of MTA transportation revenue bond refunding bonds. We're looking to currently call and currently refund a total of slightly over $1 billion of bonds, and we're going to do that in two transactions, one this week and then one later in after Labor Day. And we're looking to have favorable market conditions. We hope for that. That will be joint managed by the team of Morgan Stanley and Siebert Branford Schenck. And Oric Harrington Sutcliffe and Bryant Rubino will be bond counsel on that. So we'll report the details of that next month. Next month in August, we have a mandatory tender and remarketing of $122.5 million of TBTA general revenue bonds, 01Cs, as well as some transportation revenue bonds. And this is just our ongoing, continuing ongoing work to manage the variable rate portfolio. We have exiting banks and we have new banks coming in. The good news on that is the new banks coming in are accepting our terms and conditions, and they're coming in with very favorable pricing. In September, we expect to issue about $600 million of MTA transportation revenue bonds to refund existing commercial paper. That program is now at its 5-year anniversary, and it has to be taken out. We're going to do that with variable rate bonds. And so we'll report on that in September, October. And then, of course, lastly, our monthly fuel hedge. On June 30th, we executed a 2.9 million gallon ultra-low sulfur diesel fuel hedge with Merrill Lynch Commodities at an all-in price of just over $2 per gallon. And again, this was competitively bid with our existing providers, and the hedge itself covers the period of June 2016 through May 2017. And then the last thing, I just wanted to respond to the question that we spoke about at our last meeting. You had asked, do we need another financial advisor? We looked at our deal flow, and typically we're seeing 25 to 30 transactions per year, and of securities offerings of one kind or another, and certainly we could add additional financial advisory teams to the finance department, and we'll look to do that when we RFP for that service next year.
Thank you,
Sure.
Pat, very much. What's the exact timeline on that?
Well, we're on a 3-year cycle, so I don't know the exact month that we'll issue the RFP, but we're thinking sometime in mid-2016 with the goal of coming to the board in the 3rd quarter with our recommendations. And then we'll also be RFPing for underwriters next year as well. We're on that 3-year cycle for underwriters as well.
Pat, does the upgrade from A2 to A1 on the bonds expected to save us any interest?
That's a good question. It's hard to say. I think given that we have a variety of ratings on the bonds themselves, from the high of Kroll of a AA+ to now the low rating of Fitch at single A, we'd like to think that there'll be some benefit, but this transaction that we'll be marketing this week will be the first time since the rating upgrade, and we'll try to get a sense of that. One notch improvement is a good thing. Whether or not we can quantify that is a hard question, but we'll do our best to look at the data and see what it says. John?
Thank you.
Mr. Ballin.
Congratulations on the upgrade. That is great, and we'll see how it, what effect it has. 2 just quick things. So you want to do replace CP with variable rate? Is that what you're saying?
That is correct.
And what would be the motivation for that?
Well, the commercial paper has been a part of our financing program for years now. At different points in time, when we take that commercial paper out, we'll either issue a long-term fixed-rate bond or variable rate bonds. Earlier this year, I noted that we did a solicitation of commercial banks, both global and domestic commercial banks, and we had very favorable results come in. So we'd like to put some of that letter of credit capacity to work and issue variable rate bonds in the takeout. As you know, the variable rate portfolio is just under 8% of our total outstanding unhedged, and we have room to grow there. And given the volatility we've seen this year, given the attractive bank capacity that's on the table, we thought that was the right direction to go.
Well, it sounds logical, but you're really just taking one form of non-fixed rate and switching it to a form
Exactly.
of non-fixed rate that you think at this point in the market makes more sense, right?
Right.
Okay. And then 2 more quick things. So your timing that you were just explaining to Freddie and the linking of it, or just timing-wise, to the FA, to the underwriter selection process, you need to have an FA on board to help evaluate the underwriter selection, right? So that'll be part of your timing considerations?
Exactly. I think the goal will be to have, we always have our financial advisor assisting us with our underwriter selection process. And so whether we do it before or after, whether we use the existing FA or the new FA teams, we'll have that role at our side as we go through that process for the underwriters.
Good. And then the last thing, did you have a written quarterly calendar, perhaps, of the anticipated issuances for the upcoming quarter?
We participate in the State Securities Coordinating Committee calendar, and we put our near-term transactions on that. All of our variable rate transactions that have remarketing dates in the year is on the website, so we do have that on the website. The only thing that you don't see is, like, for example, the refunding transactions that I talked about earlier. But all of our other transactions are either on the State Securities Coordinating Calendar or are on our own website.
But what about substitution of banks, letters of credit, remarketing agents?
All those variable rate transactions are
Okay.
noted.
And okay.
We don't put the teams up because as we get closer to those deals, and we're working with one bank or another, or one remarketing agent or another, as we get closer to that, we'll most likely you'll hear it first here, and then we'll reflect it on the website.
Thank you.
Sure.
This is all essentially refinancing money. There's no new money that we're going into the market for.
That is correct. Everything is remarketings or refundings.
So there's no state tax involved or stock transfer tax involved in this.
You're asking about the bond issuance charge or the BIC that we typically charge. We did seek a waiver of the BIC in connection with this transaction and the September transaction. At this point, we have not heard back definitively from the state on whether or not they'll grant that to us.
Can you report immediately to us if the state doesn't do that?
Certainly.
Thank you. Yes.
Okay. Next is headquarter action items, and again, Pat has the one item on the agenda.
Okay. We had some late-breaking news this morning concerning the approval of the remarketing agent, which appears on page 34 of your materials, and this was seeking authority to add BMO Capital Markets as a eligible remarketing agent. I just learned this morning that this entity, BMO Capital Markets, is part of an acquisition by another firm in the market. And so given that, I would request that we pull this for consideration due to the fact that there's an imminent transaction underway, and I don't know what the future of BMO Capital Markets will be. It is being acquired by Piper Jaffray, which is also one of our co-managers. So when we sort that out, we'll come back to the committee with whatever recommendation is necessary at that time.
Okay, moving ahead, headquarter procurements. We have 5 competitive procurements for MTA HQ, 4 for personal services and 1 for miscellaneous services. This comes to a grand total of $102,060,000. So we need a vote, motion and a vote.
Any comments or questions regarding any of the procurements? All those in favor? Aye.
Okay, moving ahead, there are no items regarding Metro North. Moving to Long Island Railroad, we have 1 non-competitive sole source procurement for a total of $698,754.
Can I have a motion? Second? Any comments or questions? All in favor? Aye.
Okay. New York City Transit, we have 4 procurements, 3 of which are RFPs, for a grand total of $216,097,000.
Any comments or questions? Mr. Schwartz?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Does this include the advertising contract?
No, I believe that one's
Is
going to
that
be covered
coming
in
up?
real estate. Is that correct?
Is that
It'll
coming
be
in?
covered in real estate a little bit later.
Thank you.
Sure. Any comments or questions regarding these New York City Transit procurements? All in favor? Aye.
Okay, finally, there's 1 procurement for bridges and tunnels in the amount of $1,199,972.
Second, any comments or questions? All in favor? Aye.
Okay, there are no items for FIMTAC. I would pass the meeting on over to Jeff Rosen in real estate.
Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Brown?
I do have one just quick question on the accounting, and I realize we passed that, but I'm just curious why we think there are so few accounting firms able to and willing to compete for our business.
Angel, do you want to speak to that?
Angel Barbosa, MTA Procurement Officer.
What we've seen is that they are far more interested in the other types of business and consulting they can do with us. So you have your KPMGs and your PwCs that are involved with other big projects with us, so it precludes them from doing this type of work. And this is literally exactly the type of information, feedback that they gave us.
Thank you.
Jeff?
Thanks, Tom. Before we get to our action items, we have 1 resolution for consideration, and it's the time of year for Nancy Marshall's annual report on Grand Central retail, which is an information item in your book. Tom, did you want to speak to the affordable housing, or how do you want me to present that?
We've got a proposal from one of the board members to have a resolution on affordable housing, so yes, we should present it. Sure.
Okay. As you know, we've had
a number of discussions here regarding the issue of affordable housing as it relates to the use of our property on a variety of circumstances, so as to not have the same discussion every time we go along and every time we get a project. We did discuss the aspect of having a formal statement so that developers in whatever capacity and MTA personnel would understand the rules that everybody was adhering to. And so the resolution that has come out of those discussions basically is a forefront of public policy of the state of New York, which is to say that when a local municipality has a rule relating to affordable housing, that the use of our property does not get the developer or the municipality out of adhering to that rule. That's basically what it says, so that people know that notwithstanding the fact that our property may be exempt from zoning, which it is, this does not in any way preclude the project or any project from meeting the standard that had already been set by the local government in which the project exists. And that's basically what it says, and I think it is important for this agency to have such a position so that people who are asking to lease or purchase our property know that from the beginning, and the local governments that are involved in these type of projects, and there will be more and more of them as they go along, whether in the city of New York or outside the city of New York, understand that the use of our property can be a very, very important ingredient in making housing happen in our region, but that as part of that, the public policy of the state of New York, which is to encourage affordable housing in whatever projects it can, will know that this is one of the rules that one has to adhere to.
So Mitch, excuse me, that means that we'll go along with whatever local authority
That is
there?
correct.
Okay,
We're not setting our own standard.
right.
We're not setting a percentage. If the local municipality has a number that
Yep.
they have already set, we're going to adhere to it.
Got it.
I mean, the only caveat is that if there was an outstanding consent decree or action by a
Right.
third party,
Right.
we would abide by that.
We would
Mr.
abide by
Schwartz?
that, the same thing, yes.
Mitch, I commend you for putting forward this resolution. Let me ask you, if the local municipality doesn't have a formula for affordable housing, and we have a lot of transit-oriented
Right.
development going on, especially out in the suburbs, if they don't have a policy, but the county has a affordable housing formula, does the county's
My,
formula trumps the local municipality, or if the local municipality doesn't have a formula, then how do you move forward?
well, obviously, if nobody has a formula, there is none in whatever municipality you're talking about. From my perspective, local municipality means either the county or the city, depending on where you are, in which you are located, or the town or village. So that if any of the local municipalities under where the project is being built has such a standard, that standard would be adhered to. Yes.
What happens if they don't have a standard?
If they don't have a standard, there is no standard. We have talked about creating our own standard. That was clearly not a situation where people were comfortable. So, I have no problem setting a standard, but I don't want to force a standard on a local municipality. My hope would be the local municipality, whether it's the county or the town or the village or the city, would have such a standard, and we would adhere to it ourselves.
Well, my suggestion would be, since most counties, I think in the state of New York, especially those in the MTA region, generally have a standard,
Right.
that there be some provision that if the local municipality doesn't have one, that it jumps over to whatever the
Well, and I think
county or
that's-
state standard is.
Yes.
So that the MTA is not getting into negotiations with a developer and a municipality on what the standard should be when
Well,
there is no standard.
That's what we've been trying to avoid, and that's what's been happening on a case-by-case basis, which is why I recommended the issue, the enunciation of a specific standard, so everybody would know at the beginning what the standard would be. From my perspective, whether it's the county or the town or the village, if there's a standard for that property from any local municipality, we would adhere to that.
Wouldn't the county trump a local municipality?
Sometimes that's not always clear in the suburbs.
Mitch, if I may, the result in Harrison, which I think was entirely satisfactory for all concerned, was that the county standard was brought to bear,
Right.
but in combination with county subsidies. So that's the key.
Right.
I think there is not an automatic, supplanting of the local regulation by the county aspiration unless the county, causes that to happen. And that was what we were looking to see in Harrison, and that's in
Right.
fact what was done.
Well, there are a wide variety of ways in which this housing is subsidized. It can be state funds, which happens many times. It can be county funds. It can be local funds. However that plays its way out, that's always part of the discussion point.
I should have probably said it at the start. Mr. Capelli, I know you've got a question, if you'd bear for just a moment. Okay. Second noted. Now we're having the discussion. Where we're at today, Larry, is that over the past 6 months, we've had two different actions come before the board. One in which there was extensive discussion about affordable housing, the second which was not. The one where there was extensive discussion about affordable housing was in property we were selling in the town of Harrison. There was a consent decree, and you probably know where we ended up on that issue. There was the second real estate sell-off or acquisition by the city in Queens, Long Island City, and there was no discussion whatsoever. At a board level, individual board members felt our primary interest in selling real estate is to generate revenue for all of our extremely urgent financial needs. There are others who felt that we needed to weigh in at some level on the issue of affordable housing, even though that's not our core competency or responsibility. And I think what Mitch has proposed here is something that states in a resolution form the opinion of the board in walking through those issues in a way where it's not arbitrary and capricious. We're trying to identify selling of real estate at the highest market value, but we live in a political world. We have to be sensitive to the affordable housing, and I believe that's what the resolution Mitch has drafted tries to achieve across a broad spectrum of board member opinion as to where we should be in that spectrum. Did you have any other comments, Alan? Mr. Merdler and then Mr. Ballin.
Mitch, I'd like to suggest some language be added to that resolution to reserve to the MTA and therefore the state the right to depart from local ordinances where in the public interest that is required. I'll illustrate my point. New York City is now in the process of enacting modifications of the zoning resolution. Good, bad, or indifferent, the state may tomorrow have a different view of utilization of property in the area. By this resolution, I do not think you need to bind the state to go along in all circumstances. So all I'm saying is you should reserve the right of the state to take other action if a finding of necessity is appropriate.
Mr. Ballin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess, I don't know if I asked Mitch or you the questions I have. I understand this has been on and off. We've had behind-the-scenes discussions 6 months on this, and they've been very productive. I have a couple of questions, but this is still a non-binding resolution, right? It's just a sense of the board?
Yes.
This affects 0 transactions currently being looked at.
There are no transactions before us right now.
Well, I'm not aware of any other times that we've taken non-binding sense of the board resolutions to adopt policies that have no direct applicability to a deal in front of us. Are there others?
I can't think of any. However, that was part of the discussion in the sense that there were a couple issues, and I can't remember the other one, over the last 6 months took up an inordinate amount of time, I felt, and board members felt, in terms of taking us away from our core competencies and our responsibilities. So it's not a threshold we would cross lightly if that's what you're asking, because I think a number of us, I would prefer just as a board member not to have resolutions like this, but I certainly understand the importance of this one at this time on this issue.
Well, the only problem I have, well, I have a couple language issues, but the problem I have is whenever a board takes an action, it should have a purpose. And right now, this is kind of just a broad statement, which I believe has no legal effect because every transaction is still going to come in front of us, right?
That's correct, but it's a way to message to the local jurisdictions and to the developers what the intent of the board is. That's what it is. And I do remember what the other issue was. It was advertising, the two issues that were taking an awful lot of time and away from our basic responsibilities were advertising and affordable housing. Not that those aren't
right.
important issues.
And I agree, and I've said that. We should stick to transportation. That's what our purpose is. But I understand why it's here. But I don't understand what particularly Section 1 is doing. Because in an instance where we are selling or leasing our property, I don't understand why Mitch or anyone thinks that the issue of abiding by law is even pertinent. We always have to, there won't be a legal transaction, there won't be a closing, there won't be opinions rendered if you don't follow the law. So the fact that we're selling should not change, or leasing as lessor or as seller should not change the need to have all laws followed and abided by. So I don't understand the purpose of number 1.
I think the purpose is twofold. First, we're letting, that may or may not be the case, because our property itself, when we sell it, goes from a zoning preclusion aspect to a zoning adherence aspect. Our property at the moment is absent local zoning. Regardless of what the local zoning entity believes, our property is not subject to local zoning.
We own it.
While we own it. And so while
But we're selling it according to the
that's
language.
correct, or leasing it, okay? Or not necessarily just selling it. We may have situations in which transactions will occur in which the question may still remain as to whether our piece of the property is still adhered to local zoning. In that case, we are clearly sending a message that whether our property is 1 acre of 100 acres or 99 acres of 100 acres, if you're putting housing on as part of that project, that you have to comply with the local zoning requirements of either the county or the town or the village in which you're adhering to. So I think saying that is important. The other aspect of it is, I think...
Mitch, you always have to.
Not necessarily.
You could take out...
We had a situation... I mean,
all applicable laws have to be complied
the
with.
Harrison situation is a perfect example, okay? I don't like to make this an individual situation, but Harrison was a perfect example. Some people think the one we did in Queens was a perfect example, okay? You have situations in which, for whatever reason, local governments believe that they should have a standard except in this project. And this project should be exempt from the standard for whatever reason. All we're saying is that affordable housing to us is important enough that if our property is being used, if you have a standard, you adhere to the standard. We're not saying, we're not creating the standard. We're not even telling a local municipality you have to have a standard.
But without this resolution, they still have to comply with the standard.
I don't, then why did we have such a discussion over whether or not the consent decree issue, number one, whether the City of New York, the Queens transaction, should or should not have included affordable housing? As you know, I voted against that transaction, and Mr. Merdler agreed with me that there was a situation where the city has a standard, and the standard was not being adhered to. There might be good reasons or bad reasons, but the standard was not being adhered to. So from my perspective, telling people up front, So they don't come to us afterward and say, you know what, we didn't know there was a standard, number one, or we thought MTA would get us out of the standard. In neither case are we going to let that happen.
Look, I
Ms.
just
Metzger.
think that we had to answer your.
Go ahead.
Well,
Finish.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
I think we had a well-intentioned but uninformed discussion. I in part finance affordable housing projects. I think they're needed, I think they're important, and I look forward to working on some of them. But I don't know the meaning. I don't think this is a well-worded resolution. I don't think number one means anything, and I think we should hesitate before adopting non-binding resolutions to take sense of pulse on issues. With respect to number two, that identify its reasons for its decision. I don't even know what that means either. So I think we have an issue of well-intentioned but very confusing, ambiguous drafting, and I don't think it has any legal effect. Every time we transfer property, the entity or persons receiving that property have to apply with all applicable laws in the construction of whatever project they're undertaking. And I also think, we might be able to negotiate more affordable housing on a case-by-case basis. So if you think about it, we might be harming the affordable housing cause by undertaking this resolution.
And the point of that is, we do not want to get into a situation where we're negotiating for affordable housing percentages. I agree with the chairman. That is not our role, okay? But having said that, our role is to ensure that where appropriate in a municipality where there is such a rule, either the county or the city or the town, that that rule be adhered to. I mean, if you said to me, okay, we should negotiate affordable housing components in all of our transactions, I'm more than happy to do that, and I'll start at 100%. I'm not sure that's where we want to get to. This is part and parcel of that conversation, and I don't want, as I said, I don't want the next Harrison or Chappaqua or City of New York or Farmingdale or Ronkonkoma or whatever it is coming down the pike that is assuming that Jeff is going to enter into a transaction with them and say, oh, I didn't know you had an affordable housing rule, or I didn't know the local municipality had an affordable housing rule. We're trying to protect our interests in that regard by saying to them, listen, we're adhering to the rule exists, you have to adhere to it, that's it.
Ms. Metzger.
Right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I feel that every time this topic comes up, we have a very lengthy conversation. And I have to say that when I wear my hat sitting here, I understand the points that are being made, and I realize that this is not something that we normally do. I don't think resolution is the way we should move forward on many things. But when I wear my hat as chairman of my county planning board, I think this is very, very helpful, because it does very clearly message what our position is when properties come to this board. I understand it doesn't bear the force of law. I understand that there are ways that we might add to it or improve it, but for the time being, and without another vehicle to make this point, I appreciate this and I'd like it to move forward. Thank you.
Pelley.
Mr. Chairman,
Schwartz.
yeah, before you take an action, and I apologize since I'm a new board member and I haven't had time to get involved in some of these issues. Again, listen, I am an advocate and proponent of making sure that if this authority approves any kind of transfer of real estate for any type of residential development, that there's an affordable housing component involved in any type of development. Those are the people that we serve, is the working middle class of New York State. I just want to make sure, Mitch, that in any message that we're sending out there, that not only are we sending a message from a policy standpoint that this board and this authority is seeking that there's an affordable housing component in any project that involves residential development, I think there's got to be some kind of standard. You know, every municipality has a different standard. Some are more open to the idea of affordable housing, and some aren't. We've all experienced that, especially those who've been served in government. And I don't want somebody to turn around and get a town board or local municipality to change their density for a specific project. So I do think there's got to be some kind of standard, or we're going to be back in the same boat on a project-by-project basis. I understand from Mr. Ballin that I'm sure something's going to have to come before this board, so it's going to come back anyway. I would just suggest, if you know, for your consideration, if you don't want to postpone this any longer than you probably already have to the next board meeting, that you at least consider using a county standard or some universal standard of 20% or some number, because these standards are all over the place. You can always come down and negotiate off that based on a project-by-project basis, but I think there have been certain standards that have been pushed by the state of New York, the city of New York, and a lot of the counties here in the state. And like I said, you know, if you look at it on a municipality-by-municipality basis, it's all over the map.
Right.
And some municipalities have done a great job in this area, and some have done not such a great job, depending on how you look at life. So I would just, you know, because I'm a little concerned in the resolve thing where it says we're all such applicable affordable housing requirements, that it kind of leaves it kind of open-ended to interpretation and change. And I think, you know, I agree with you, we should send a message, but I think the message should be very clear.
Well, the only thing, and I thank you for your comments, I would agree, I'm not sure everybody else does. And so in the conversations that we've had, it was clear to me and to the chair that MTA setting its own standard, because of the variety of standards that are set by the municipalities across our region, is not something at this moment that enough people would support. I would request, I think it's important that we pass this resolution today to send that signal, and then we can obviously have further discussions to even make it more effective as we go along, as individual transactions come to play. But I wouldn't want to delay the importance of this statement pending a discussion about specific numbers. So I would request that we pass this in its current form, and then we can always look at whether we want to set a specific number or standards in that regard in the months ahead.
Mr. Albert.
Maybe I'm not perfectly understanding Mr. Schwartz's last comment. Are you suggesting that absent, if a municipality and or a county does not have affordable housing regulations, that the MTA set some? Was that the import of your?
No, I don't think then the MTA should move forward with the transfer of real estate, and that's the town of Harrison example, which I was also involved in. Town of Harrison wanted the MTA to transfer a very valuable piece of real estate to build residential housing, high-end residential housing along the Harrison train station without a single affordable housing unit. That obviously did not happen because of intervention of a number of people. I'm just saying that at some point here, I think, yeah, we're in the transportation business. We're also in the economic development business. And I don't think there's anything wrong with us espousing other policies that we think benefit the entire transit system. And that including making sure that we promote a way for people to get to work, especially people that don't have high incomes. So I would just want to make sure that if we're going to promote the transfer of real estate for residential development, especially along the, you know, commuter rail corridor, that there be an affordable housing component. And I just want to make sure that we should consider a standard versus a piecemeal standard, because that's the way the standard's set in most municipalities. Not everyone adheres to the same standard. as a percentage of affordable units in a project.
Did you have a question or comment, Ms. Trottenberg?
I think just the discussion, and we'd had a lot of discussion on this point, I think from the city's point of view, and I'm actually a little confused about what you're saying about Queens, because that project didn't violate the zoning standards of that parcel. But I think from the city's point of view, our feeling was that agreeing that for the MTA, given the fiscal picture of the MTA, which is not so good right now, that maximizing the value of real estate was a very high goal, and to the extent that a local municipality, city, village, county, et cetera, wanted to add in affordable housing goals, just as it happened in Harrison, they would have to subsidize the difference so that the MTA would essentially be whole in the transaction. That sort of seemed like the fair, given that from the point of view of this board, our goal right now is to make sure that the MTA has the funds it needs to.
That's fine,
Yeah.
as long as that happens. If that doesn't happen, I still wouldn't move the transaction forward.
I think, well, there's some that would say that we would be violating our fiduciary responsibility then. So there was a very active dialogue. There were people at opposite ends of the spectrum. There were some people that said we should be selling board members saying we should selling the real estate at the highest possible value. There were others saying that no, we had a moral obligation on a political front to move affordable housing up. And this is what I consider to be a compromise. As I said before, I normally don't like resolutions because they do have some of the questions you raised, what do they mean? But as a messaging tool, I think it's pretty clear. And if we go to the point of getting involved in setting standards, I dare say we're getting way outside our core competency. That is not what anybody at this agency has the ability to do. And so we're trying to find this middle ground because we live in a political world. We want to be sensitive to that and message to people that there will be an element of affordable housing in the dialogue and the sale of this real estate. And the only difference between the two is that the one in Queens did meet all of it, but there are some people who, from 100,000 feet, Polly said, why was there an active discussion on affordable housing in one and yet not on another? So I'd like to bring this to a vote. So,
But just for the record, I mean, that one, the MTA did talk to city planning, and
yes,
the city
absolutely.
went along, and, I mean, yeah, there were some people
Absolutely.
who wanted affordable housing, but nothing untoward happened.
Absolutely.
Nobody was ignoring city requirements or
No.
city zoning.
No, you're absolutely correct.
We get one
Mr.
more.
Murdler had
Yeah,
a
yeah.
question before you.
Sorry, Chuck.
I have no problem at all going forward with this now, but I do want to make clear that under the rubric of affordable housing, which I support, there are zoning resolutions that come and go, as one is being proposed in the city now, which have components having nothing to do with affordable housing, such as a ban on all parking within those facilities. I want to reserve for the future in language that makes sure that we're not caught in that mess going forward. That's all.
That's my understanding. It's a resolution, so it has the value that it has. And if we continue to be bogged down in the mire of this issue of affordable housing, I'm sure we'll have more discussions to change that position if we need to.
But I think, I just have to jump in here. I mean, I don't want people to vote for this thinking that we're going to come back and then say, if the MTA sells this property to a private developer, they're exempt from city zoning requirements, because you don't like, I mean, that's not,
Nobody said that.
That's what I just sort of,
and
Chuck, am I
that's-
misunderstanding you? That's what I thought you just said. That you want, if a private if we sell them the property, they
No.
want to be exempt from, let's say, a
You
city.
misheard me.
Okay,
All I said was, I want to make sure that in a given case where the state has an interest, where the community has an interest or the like, a position can be taken as variance. I want to reserve that right. To illustrate, the state has a supervening right over the city on all zoning matters. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. Zoning is a state issue, and it delegates it to the city. If, for example, Suffolk County were to enact a rule under the rubric of zoning that said there can be no more than 2 people living in a house, that is not something that the state may want. It's not something that we may want. All I want to be in a position to do is to make sure that we are not locking ourselves into things that are not necessarily intelligent.
But if this is property that's being sold to a private developer, they're gonna have to adhere to what Suffolk County or New York City or Westchester County or anybody else would have in their zoning requirements. We don't get to pick and choose.
Let me illustrate the point one further, and then I will stop. At the moment, property in the Bronx that was once the home of a psychiatric center is state-owned property. It could be argued that if you sell that to a developer, that developer automatically becomes obligated under state law to follow state law. Could also be argued that the city law would apply. Now, let's assume the city law is, as is proposed in the current version advanced by city planning, there shall be no parking facilities built into this housing in order to foster affordable housing. And it is determined that, bearing in mind you're immediately adjacent to a parkway, you ought to have, and a bunch of hospitals, you ought to have some parking. The state has an absolute right, without reservation, to supersede city zoning. And I don't want to waive that right.
But not if the
There's
state
nothing
is
in-
selling the property to a private developer. I mean, if the state is developing the property itself and retaining ownership, yes, but if it's selling the property to a private developer, it doesn't supersede city zoning at that point.
And I'd like to take this to a vote, please.
Tom?
Mr. Ferrer's got the floor.
It was not without enormous levels of discussion that we came even to this. Frankly, I believe that it was dangerous even to have a policy when you have other governments and levels of government regulating and making laws. My principal concern is, and no one, I don't think I take a backseat to anybody with respect to affordable housing. But I do say that it moves us inexorably in the direction of regulating a requirement we impose. If you are ready for that, and if you are ready for the expenditures and all of the other energies and resources that follow that regulation, well, then maybe we ought to go into a different direction. I think Mitch has offered a sensible way for this board to express itself to county and town and village governments that gives us a way to assert a preference for affordable housing while not prejudicing any individual action we may take as a board on any specific transaction. And that's why I think Mr. Palley's resolution is so valuable, and that's why I hope we'll approve it.
We got a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Okay, thanks. So I think I'll just briefly summarize what Nancy was going to say. Annually, we typically give a report on our progress at Grand Central because it is such an important asset. And the presentation is in written form, an item at the back of your books. The headline is that we've enjoyed another year of increased revenue at Grand Central, reflecting, I think, some very able stewardship by Nancy and her team. And specifically, I think we're reaping the fruits of some of the decisions we've made in the past in facilitating the Apple Store and so on. I'm happy to say that the Klaus Meyer food court and restaurant that we've described to you previously will be breaking ground as soon as the Christmas fair comes down. We're now up to net revenues, NOI, of $25 million at Grand Central, which I think fully realizes the promises that people made to one another when we funded the the renovation years ago in large measure in anticipation of this revenue. So sometimes things do work out as intended in government. We have at Grand Central in the way of shopping centers typically percentage rent provisions in our leases, so we do enjoy upside appreciation and value even before leases roll over, but we are finding nonetheless that when we roll leases over, we are getting base rent offers now in excess of what we call the effective rent, which is to say the combined base and percentage rent that we have under the old leases. So just to give you a feel for that, we are now seeing north of $500 a foot, and in the latest case, actually $800 a foot for our retail space at Grand Central. You will see reports commonly about, $20,000 a foot on Fifth Avenue and so on. Sometimes these things are hard, honestly, to measure because, there's space. It's upstairs, downstairs. They're talking about the best frontage on the street and so on. But the point is that we're delighted with the trajectory here. We're doing very well. I'd like to speak to one of the action items in the book here that relates to Penn, because I know that Mitch has, for good reason, consistently raised the question of, well, what about Penn? Because Grand Central, it's all well and good, but many of our commuters obviously don't use Grand Central. I don't need to tell you that Penn Station is a different facility. We have 150,000 feet now of excellent space in a beautiful landmark, world-class landmark at Grand Central. At Penn, the space tends to be constrained physically in all sorts of ways, both in terms of the actual space, the ceiling heights, and also the mechanicals and the like. But we are consistently increasing the rents that we're getting at Penn. We're up north of $200 a foot there now, even with the really very sort of, I'll say it, unattractive, overall appearance of the retail there. But the action item, I think, is something I'm very, very pleased to bring to you. This is some while in the making. As many of you know, many members of the public don't appreciate, the north side of the 33rd Street corridor in the Long Island Railroad concourse at Penn is not our retail. It's Vornado's retail. Our retail is on the south side of the corridor, Au Bon Pain, and the like. And we within the limitations of the space, we think we do a pretty good job with it. We've achieved a settlement with Vornado of a variety of issues that we've been discussing with them in the past years, and the upshot is that they are committing now, in anticipation of a very ambitious master plan for remaking One Penn Plaza. They are committing now to signage requirements, merchandising, and the like, which are described in a letter that's attached to the item, which we are delighted about, because we think we're in a position now to engender a virtuous cycle there, which will have positive revenue implications, we believe, but more importantly, I think will change the sort of general experience of Penn. There is a way to make money with retail that's not attractive. So largely this is about non-monetary considerations. We are also, as described in the staff summary, able now to extend a space lease that we have in the basement of One Penn, which houses vital station-related operational functions, which we'd be hard-pressed to relocate. So very pleased to bring that to you. In addition, we have 15 other action items. We have 2 months' worth of staff summaries this month. As usual, they're pretty detailed and I hope self-explanatory, but I'd be glad to take questions about any of them.
Any comments or any questions? Mr. Pally?
I want to thank Jeff and his staff, and I want to speak strongly in support of the Penn Station action item. We all understand the handicaps Jeff and his staff have to operate under at Penn. I could use many more words other than unattractive, but I'll be tactful at the moment. But it is clear that this is a step in the right direction. It will hopefully lead to not only improvements by Vornado, but substantial improvements by Amtrak, by New Jersey Transit, and by MTA, because we do own a portion of the property, and it's important for us to send a signal that we care about the people at Penn Station, whether that's lighting, or the reception room, or the bathrooms, or the signage, or whatever it is. And I know there's, money in the new capital plan for that, assuming we ever get a new capital plan. But when we get a new capital plan, that will be part and parcel of the improvements at Penn Station. We have, millions of people who go through that area, and notwithstanding fault and notwithstanding years, they deserve better than they have been given at Penn Station, and it's important for us to realize that. Just an anecdote, I didn't realize how important it was until I went with my wife to see the New York City Spring Spectacular at Radio City Music Hall this spring. As you know, Radio City Music Hall is owned by Madison Square Garden, which of course is one of the major tenants of Penn Station. And as part of the story, they were starting a tour of New York City landmarks, and of course the tour started at Grand Central. And I thought that was a symbol, if nothing else, being told us by Madison Square Garden that Penn Station is not worth including in the tour. And that to me is a reason, if no other reason, than the benefit we provide to everybody. So Jeff, thank you very much for your work on this, and I would urge its adoption by the board. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Burdler? Okay, so noted. You will be recused from that vote. We have a motion and a second.
So moved.
I need a recusal if you're doing it
Go
in
ahead, Mr.
lump.
Bellamy.
If you're doing them in lump, I need to be recused from the extension of advertising license resolution. Thank you.
Any other recusals? If not, any other comments on the procurements? If not, we can vote them.
Is Outfront Media?
Yes, it's in there, so if you have comments.
Yes, then I have
okay.
comments. One is, let me first, again, as a new board member, I appreciate the amount of work and effort goes into preparing these documents for the board. They're quite voluminous, and I got a lot of them all at one time. And I would ask, Mr. Chair, maybe we can, if I'm the only board member, then I'll go with the flow, but maybe there's a way to kind of simplify or package some of the material a little bit differently or better, so it's easier, at least for me as a board member, to kind of focus on the things that are really important and needed as a board member that I have to vote on. My concern is when I came across the Outfront Media contract, number one is the resolution calls for a one-year extension, and I'm a little concerned that 6 months before this contract was supposed to expire, instead of having an RFP out on the street to address the expiration of this contract, we're now asking for a one-year extension. I understand and appreciate that technology is fast-paced and is always evolving, and there may be things happening here that create pause, but I am a big advocate of competition. I think when you promote and advocate for competition, you get better pricing, which means more revenue or greater savings. There was language in this resolution that also said, while we're looking to extend it for a year, we also want the option of maybe terminating it 6 months into 2016 with a 3 months notice. To me, I think a more reasonable approach would be to give the MTA flexibility, and I don't see why this would be a problem for Outfront Media, is if you want to continue things on a month-to-month basis while the MTA procurement staff team is figuring out what's the best way to maximize advertising revenue, whether it's, print, digital, or some other form, with a 3-month notification clause. I think that would be more reasonable than just giving a one-year extension with a 6-month out. I don't see why Outfront Media can't deal with it, can't plan. They got 6 more months left on their existing contract. They know there's a month-to-month with a 3-month notification. So I just don't like the idea that 6 months prior to an expiration, we're extending it for a year with the option of getting out, in July of 16.
Fair enough. Larry, our intention was that in all likelihood, we would be in a position to, depending on the responses we get to the RFP, that we would be in a position to terminate as soon as July 1. The reason that we asked for an extension through the end of the year is so that we could coordinate it with the railroad and bus and outdoor billboard contracts that have differing termination dates, but that we would, in any case, be able to terminate them earlier. In terms of the month-to-month, the thing is, with existing technology, based on the way they sell ads today, largely with a non-digital inventory, with the national advertisers in particular, they typically are selling 6 months in advance. So they would pretty rapidly come to a point where their sales could be impaired, and we wouldn't want that to
Well, if
happen.
it doesn't work, in the interest of time, I'm not going to debate whether or not they can do it or not. I'm not an expert in this area. Then I would limit the extension to 6 months. And you always can come back if you need more time. I don't think, we should grant a one-year extension. You said it yourself. You think by the time July comes, you'd be ready. So why not just give us, if you
Well, we
need
want
to,
to be
give
able,
us 6 months.
as I say, we want to be able to terminate the other agreements as well. So that's what we're looking to do.
Part of this may be some input I provided them as CEO. I've said this to board members in the past. The CEO and the chairman talk to each other regularly, but one of the concerns I had, and maybe the board members shared it, is generally speaking, these advertised contracts are long in nature in terms of term. They're a long-term relationship because of the level of investments that the supplier is making to fulfill the services of the contract. And so when you make the decision to award a contract, it's with that understanding that it's a relatively long term, more than 3 years usually. It's 6 or 7 years within options. The other thing is the importance of, if there is potential to have a benefit of a shared procurement across the commuter railroads with transit. And the third area is, the explosion in digital advertising in terms of what you do to reach and what you do in terms of generating revenue. And so, probably at the result, I didn't direct them to say extend it, but I said it may be in the interest of the authority, MTA, to extend the contract in a way where we can answer all of those questions. I mean, the other thing is we have been pretty much consumed by what is the most important thing for us, which is the capital program. And we're going to have some significant discussions and decisions to make over the next 6 months. And I didn't know if a 6-month extension would actually give us the benefit of what we needed to do to come to terms with awarding a contract, or contracts, whatever decision we make. But certainly we can take a look at that. But if we do look at that, we'd have to hold over the procurement. And I do believe where the extension, we have an obligation to tell them where they sit. So would you want to respond to that, Jeff? I mean, I would prefer to go forward with it with the year extension, but I do understand your concerns.
Yeah, again, as I say, the purpose of this resolution was not to delay our action unduly, but to provide us with maximum flexibility, obviously under the supervision of the board.
Can you do a 6-month extension with an option for another 6 months if you had to?
Yes, I think we could do that. It doesn't line up the contracts in precisely the same way, but we could do that if that's the preference of the board.
And suppose we amend the resolution to so provide.
Mr. Chairman, if you think it's going to cause a problem, I'm not here to cause a problem. It's from an operational revenue standpoint. I just was a little concerned when I saw it that 6 months before the expiration, when usually the RFP would be going out on the street for review, that we're extending it for a year. That's why I thought, the month-to-month would work. I would ask if people don't think a 6-month extension with the possibility of a 6-month renewal If you're not ready to go and you want to wait till the end of 16, then you could always provide another 6 months as a way of addressing the issue.
I think the way it's worded now, we're asking for a year extension, but we have the ability to terminate after 6 months.
As soon as July, yes.
So it's almost approaching it from the other perspective, so we still have the option. We want to accelerate the decision as fast as we can as to whether or not we're going to have a single procurement or two procurements,
Yeah.
but, so we're almost in the same place the way it's worded now, but we could, I guess we could reconstruct it.
I'm Jerry Page, the General Counsel at MTA. I had the discussions with Outfront regarding this extension, and what was said previously, they underlined, which was their concern about having a definitive period of time to wind down their sales activities and be able to give some assurance to the advertisers that when they enter into a contract, they will run them. So 3 months was the minimum period of time that they were willing to take as a notice period between the notice and the termination. So that's why we were fairly certain we would not be in a position until July of 2016 to award the new contract, and then we tried to, with a 3-month notice period to meet their commercial needs, would then have kind of a rolling period of time.
I'm fine, 6 months is double 3 months, so I think that's pretty generous. I just like to keep a little pressure on and see us get to an answer and resolution sooner rather than later on things of this ilk. So, if the other board members aren't agree with me and they want to extend it for a year, so be it. But I'd rather see a 6-month extension with a 6-month option to renew if for some valid reason it's not in the MTA's interest to terminate it by July 1st. If there's a legal reason why we can't amend that resolution now and say it,
I mean, I guess from
I
a
want to
practical...
belabor it.
Sorry. From a practical matter, though, if we're going to continue the 3-month, it actually limits our flexibility, the approach you're taking, because if we have to have a 3-month notice for the expiration, then we would have to give them the renewal notice in the end of March of 2016, because they need that knowledge of the 3 months. So
I know, but they thought their contract was going to expire on December 31st, 2015. Now we're going to extend it, so they know what they're going to have. I'm not understanding or following why this is a problem for Outfront or why it would even be a problem internally. If you put a resolution and says your contract will be extended to July 1st and with an option to, possibly extend it longer for another 6 months as needed, and you'll get 3 months' notice as to whether or not we're going to do it or not. There's language in there now that says we're going to extend it for a year, but we have the flexibility to terminate it on July 1st with 3 months' notice. So to me, it's semantics.
I'm less concerned. I am concerned about the relationship we have with outside suppliers, and I'm not mindless of it, but I'm less concerned about their interest than I am about ours. To be able to sort this issue, to bring the information to the board in an informed way so that that informed decision can be made, I think Jerry's right. To do it by March 31st is a lot more difficult. And I know we're sitting in July, but these are long-term contracts, and this digital piece is one that could be a minefield for us, or minefield, meaning a lot of revenue for us. I want to make sure that we look at it right. So, was there a resolution to?
I believe I have an amendment to it.
So what? Could you state your amendment?
Stated in terms of 6 months with an option for a 6-month renewal extension.
Any discussion on that? We'll vote that.
I guess the question is that practical?
I think just to say...
I guess I don't want to get to a situation where we reduce our own flexibility. Is that practical in the context of the timing appropriate for the RFP?
I think that's the concern, is that the current scheduling with the additional strategic analysis that's being done is to get the RFP out late fourth quarter of this year. We probably won't be at a point by the end of March to be able to know whether we want to, whether we'll be done by June 30th. So under this approach, we would have to give the notice and extend. Under our approach, if we get to, say, May, and we're fairly certain we're going to have an award, then we can give the notice and terminate, say, in August or September. So we actually have the added flexibility as we watch the RFP play out of being able to terminate earlier than the end of 2016 to actually shorten the period of time Outfront has it, whereas the proposed resolution would essentially require us to know when we will have an award by the end of March, so that we can, to protect ourselves, we would have to give.
You could extend it.
Extend.
The 6 months for another 6.
But we have to give them the notice. And we would have to do that 3 months in advance, which would be by the end of March. And we may not know enough, so we would end up giving that notice.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to withdraw my thing, but I'm just going on the record that I'm constantly going to be asking for a status update of this thing. I will say to you that I think that the way technology moves, and I'm not a technology expert either, that if you're not going to know in March, then you're not going to know in April, May, or June, okay? I really think that you're either going to know or you're not going to know. And so I'm going to be looking for the MTA to come to a conclusion and resolution in a smart, intelligent, beneficial way sooner rather than later. But in the interest of time and moving this along, I withdraw it, and I'll make a motion or second it if it's not already to move this forward.
There's motion up, we have to.
Withdraw.
Okay. Having that, we've had a motion, seconded, discussion. All in favor of the resolution as the staff summary is drafted? Aye. Points well known, taken, and we will make sure we keep you informed.
And I hope that's for the 16
That's all of them.
items, right?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
We now make a motion to go into executive session. We'll go right next door here.